Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. We are so glad you're able to join us today. My name is Jason Mercer, and I'll be your host today. Today's webinar topic is on cost-effective repairs with trenchless sewer linings, presented by Mike Kynette. Today, Mike will cover the benefits of cured-in-place pipe, or CIPP, trenchless sewer lining. He's going to discuss the limitations of using CIPP, present installation procedures, and finally discuss sewer service lining options with us. So who is Mike Kynette? Mike is a professional engineer with 17 years of experience. He is a graduate of Montana Tech and began his career working on large road projects around the country. He then spent 7 years working as a designer and project engineer on a variety of municipal projects. He has been in the Great Falls office of Morrison-Maierle for 7 years and primarily designs and manages water and wastewater projects for a variety of clients. We will get to Mike's presentation momentarily, but first a couple logistical comments. If anyone has any questions during today's presentation, you can submit them through the question panel on your webinar interface, and we will answer as many as we can after the presentation. Today's webinar will also be recorded and posted to our website later this week. And we will post today's PowerPoint slides if you would like to access those as well. If you're an engineer seeking PDH credits, this session may meet requirements for PDHs depending on your professional registration and/or certification requirements. If you would like a certificate of participation to validate your attendance, please email Jenna Comstock at jcomstock@m-m.net to request one. Okay, without further ado, I will pass the controls to Mike. And Mike, when you are ready, take it away.
Okay, I think I'm ready. Can everybody see my screen now with the presentation? Hear me okay? Jason, can you see my screen?
I can see it and I can hear you just great.
Perfect. Okay, well, I will get going. Thank you for the intro, Jason. And I want to thank everybody for joining us over the lunch hour. And hopefully I'll cover some useful topics that'll help you on projects you may be looking at, or give you something to think about down the road with some projects that may come up. Hopefully you'll have some good questions at the end of the session. Like Jason said, if you just want to type those in, we'll look at those and hopefully answer those at the end. So I've got approximately 14 years of municipal water, wastewater project experience, like Jason said. My experience with trenchless sewer lining. I've done everything from 8 to 9 inch, 10 inch sewer main, service collector mains, lining those, all the way up to 42 inch interceptor mains, coming into a wastewater treatment plant. And obviously there's different challenges for both of those and areas of focus. With the big sewer interceptors, you're looking at bypass pumping as kind of the primary focus. With, you know, we were looking at 3 to 4 million gallons a day to bypass pump those sections of line to get it to that flow down to the waste plant. And then with the sewer service lines or mains, you're looking at more at the residential services and getting those open and kind of bypassing smaller sections, but still pretty critical and kind of getting notices out. They are both of those sizes, or, you know, as you go along, are pretty similar in evaluations and installations. So we'll cover that a little bit more as we get along here. Moving on to the next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about some trenchless lining methods. There's several, you know, popular methods. The cured in place pipe, the CIPP, that's what my main focus will be on today. We'll get into a little bit more of the you know, pros and cons and the installation methods, but essentially you're putting in a new pipe liner into an existing pipe, and you're curing that out and reinstating services if they're there, and essentially you end up with a brand new pipe inside of the existing pipe. The fold and form method is very similar to the CIPP method, different materials. Here we're using kind of a plastic liner is inserted into an existing pipe versus the epoxy and felt liner that the CIPP method uses. But you're still doing the same thing. You're inserting and inflating it, curing it out, and you end up with a a new pipe inside the existing pipe. The pipe bursting method is a little bit different than the first two. Here you're pulling in a new pipe, usually a fused pipe like an HDPE or a PVC. You're pulling it into the existing pipe, but you have a cutter head at the beginning of that pull line, and so you're breaking up the pipe as you're pulling that new pipe in. And what this kind of gives you the advantage is if you can upsize the existing pipe. So if you've got an 8-inch pipe, you can actually go up a few sizes. The amount that you can go up, it depends on the soil conditions in the area and kind of what that existing pipe is. So it kind of is dictated how much you can expand that soil in that pipe around the new pipe. And then slip lining is kind of the last one I was going to cover. It's kind of similar to pipe bursting, where you're pulling in a new line, usually a fused line. In this case, though, you're actually keeping the existing pipe intact. So you're pulling in the new pipe, and then afterwards you would actually grout or somehow fill the space between that new pipe and then the existing pipe. Like I said, we'll mostly cover CIPP here. So the topics that I was going to go through were, first of all, the benefits of the CIPP lining. We'll talk about the kind of the limitations of what the CIPP lining can do. I'll go through a typical CIPP lining installation and kind of the procedures there. And then I'll talk a little bit about sewer service lining at the end and the options that are available with that. So before we get too far in, we'll do a poll question just to see where you guys are at as far as experience. So we're looking to see if you've installed trenchless sewer linings in your system before.
So Mike, we've got people voting, getting results. We'll just give it here a couple seconds more.
Perfect.
Do 20 seconds total. So it looks like 56% said yes and 44% said no.
Okay, so we've got a pretty even bunch here. So a lot of people have seen it before, and maybe a lot of people haven't seen it before. So hopefully we'll cover the basics, and then maybe the people who have seen it before will cover some items that they haven't seen or items to think about. So okay, well, thanks for jumping in and answering that poll. So we'll start first with the benefits of CIPP trenchless lining. First and foremost, we'll cover the construction, and in line with that, cost will be the first item I talk about. Cost is probably the first thing we always evaluate, the cost to benefit ratio. With CIPP trenchless lining, you're looking at roughly 60 to 70% of the open cut replacement cost. So there's some significant savings with doing a trenchless lining project versus a standard or typical open cut. The big factor in here is service restoration. So if you've got a bunch of paved areas that you're going through or those lines are under, it's going to definitely be more cost effective doing the trenchless method. If you're in kind of open areas that you're maybe just going to come back and seed or grade, then the scale kind of starts to tip closer to the open cut replacement costs. Kind of the next item, and it'll come back to cost too, is the duration. You're looking at approximately a third of the time for a typical sewer section, maybe less. You can do two blocks in a day typically of trenchless sewer lining, versus when you open cut, it could take almost a week to do a typical block, including the surface restoration. So you're significantly reducing the amount of time that you're out in that road or in that area, and part of that with reducing the duration is you're reducing inspection costs and kind of the contract administration durations. So you're kind of saving some indirect costs there as well. One of the other advantages, going down the list here, existing utilities, you don't have to open cut and deal with other utilities, you know, whether that's other of your utilities, water, storm, things like that, or gas lines, telephone, all those things that we keep seeing in kind of crowded utility corridors that are always kind of a hassle. That, you know, you have to go out there and pothole and make sure you don't hit those. Here you actually don't even have to call in a locate for these trenchless because you're not opening anything up. So it's, as far as dealing with the existing utilities, if you're in crowded corridor, this is a huge advantage. Talking season, so trenchless lining can be done in the winter months. Kind of talking about Montana and our region. There are some limitations to that. I've seen water trucks freeze up, so that the contractor does need water to clean the lines and to do the curing process, whether that's hot water or steam. So have seen when it gets cold enough, if you're talking negative temperatures, they do have issues with their trucks. But for the most part, this work can be conducted in our typical winter months when we may be down for construction. So you can push some of your staff and inspection things into that winter when you're not in the, you know, our main construction season, where you're trying to, you know, put people on projects and you're kind of maxed out. So it kind of gives you the advantage of working in the off season. Service disruptions, we've kind of talked about the time frame. You're looking at, you know, half a day for having, you know, like residential services blocked off before those get opened up. And the other thing with those service disruptions, you have them blocked off for that time frame, but then once you get in there with your robot and open up those, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I see a lot of times with open cut construction sewers, you're kind of connecting them as you come to them. A lot of the time you're kind of hoping that nobody uses their facilities at that time. You have the potential for waste to go right into the trench, and that's not fun for anybody, especially the guy down there. So here you've got the service blocked right up until you go through and open it, and then once you open it, all that material or flow goes right back into the sewer and down to your manhole, and as it normally would get collected. So you're eliminating a lot of the potential for stuff to get out of your pipe. So that's a pretty good advantage. And then bypass pumping. So we're looking for here with the duration again with bypass pumping, where you may be able to just bypass pumping for the day, to bypass a section. And it is required to bypass pump during the installation. You don't want that water to get or flows to get behind your liner as you're lining it. But here you're talking, just during the daytime hours, you don't have to worry about having that bypass set up for a week with the open cut. And you don't have to worry about having backup generators and things going down at night and getting calls out. So that's another advantage to the trenchless lining, is the bypass pumping, and mainly comes back to duration. Some more benefits. We'll get into the materials now. The liner lifespan of the CIPP pipe is similar to new pipe. It's specified to be guaranteed for 50 years, but it is, it's going to last longer than that 50 years. I would view it similar to a new PVC line as far as the lifespan. The other nice thing about the CIPP, and we kind of talked about the slip lining where you have to grout that space between the new pipe and the old pipe. The CIPP method, basically the new liner expands to fit the existing pipe, and you'll see every single flaw or intrusion of that old pipe come through on the new pipe. So it's an advantage, and sometimes it's a disadvantage, but we'll talk more about that. So poll question number 2, what is the current age of your sewer mains? Just curious of what kind of ages you're dealing with.
I think we might have the wrong poll up.
Uh-oh.
But just hang on, Mike. We'll take that down and switch it around here. You said current age. Okay, here we go. Yep. All right. Sorry
right.
about that, folks. If you can re-enter, select an option that best suits you, that would be great. Just give it here about 10 more seconds. All right. So looks like about 40% are in that 40 to 60 years of age. 33% are in that 60 plus, and 20% is 20 to 40 years. And we've got a few that less than 10% are in that 0 to 20.
Okay. Well, thanks for answering that question. It sounds like everybody's kind of the typical Montana or our region community where our pipes are getting pretty old and we're starting to look at deterioration in those pipes and what kind of options there are for replacing those. So this is hopefully a good presentation and good timeliness on this. So now we'll get into the limitations of the CIPP trenchless lining. So kind of the first topic we'll cover is existing conditions. So this is more not so much the limitations of the liner itself, but what you have to line into. So the first one is pipe size would be the first thing to look at. If you've got a pipe that is constantly surcharging or doesn't have the capacity to take the flow that it's seeing, CIPP lining probably or isn't the best option to improve that. This is where maybe you'd look at doing some pipe bursting to try to go up a couple sizes, or this is maybe just you would have to go to an open cut trench to put in a new pipe that's larger. Pipe grade, so we kind of talked about the liner matches the existing pipe as you're installing it. So if you have any existing flat spots, low spots, the pipe itself, the whole length is less than kind of what you'd like to see. Same thing if you start to see, you've seen surcharges in the pipe or you get material built up. This is an area if you can replace those sections, if they're small enough to replace to make it cost effective, then that would be a good thing to do beforehand, or you would have to do that beforehand. If it's the entire length of the pipe, here's where you're kind of looking at jumping back to open cut, where you're going to have to change the grade of that pipe. So that's another limitation. Fittings and bends, I've seen this a few times where there was a 45 put into the sewer line. It's rare, but it does happen. This is another thing when you kind of look through your initial evaluation, if there's any kind of blockages or turns in the pipe, you want to evaluate those. If you can repair those or kind of mitigate those prior to the lining, that kind of makes it makes lining an option again. But those are areas that you're just not going to be able to line through. You end up the actual lining can fold on itself and you get what are called fins, and if those end up on the bottom, they can cause problems and backup. So you've actually probably caused more harm than good with lining it. So those are things to look at. And then finally, existing damage. So when you're going through, if you've got holes in the pipe or you've got large collapses or intrusions, those are areas that you'll want to have repaired or replaced prior to the lining. And that's kind of the same thing, depending on the extents. If they're small areas, you could still make the lining worthwhile. But if it's the whole pipe and you've kind of lost integrity of the pipe, that you may have to look at, like I said, open cutting or maybe a pipe bursting there where you can get through that pipe. So those are some of the limitations you have to look at from standpoint of what your existing system is, what that existing pipe looks like. Limitations as far as construction. So the CIPP lining, they're a specialized contractor. I know in Montana, in our region, there are not a whole lot of these type of contractors, pretty limited bidding field. The size of your project may attract more bidders and the size of the pipe. So if you're adding quite a few lines and things that can be helpful with bidding and getting kind of those the price is down as well. It's like anything else. You get a price break the more you do, and so that's something to think about. Scheduling. So most of these contractors is being specialized. They're several months out in their construction schedule. So if this is something you're looking to get done right away, you're probably going to pay a premium to expedite the project. So that's kind of something to think about. This is something you want to plan out in advance, and if you're looking to bid this out in the winter, you're probably do the construction in the winter, you're looking at bidding it out, spring, maybe early summer, but then you're starting to get back them up, or you're getting into their schedule backed up. Some more limitations as far as construction. Liner malfunctions, not so much a limitation, but maybe a risk. So the liner is usually built to order for the size and length, so that kind of factors into the scheduling. There could be defects in the wetting out process, dry spots. We'll kind of talk more about that process later down the road. Transportation and storage on site. Heat can cause these liners to cook out prematurely. So if you're setting them out in the open sun, I've seen this happen a couple times. They'll actually prematurely cure, which makes it very hard to pull these pipes down through the existing pipe. So that's another thing to kind of look at and just understand that they need to bring trucks out that are refrigerated or out of the depending on the temperature, and that may push you one way or the other on winter and summer construction. Installation issues. We kind of talked about bypass pumping. If the bypass pumping isn't set up correctly, or you get some flow by, you can actually get some water behind the liner during the curing process, and that can cause those fins, where the liner's essentially wrinkling on you. Can also cause drooping in the top of the line. That water's getting up there and it's actually pushing it down and causing areas so you wouldn't be able to get your cleaning equipment through the pipe down the road after you were finished. So those are just the kind of the limitations or things to look at for as far as the liner. Another one is get down to the odors here. So this is kind of a epoxy resin based liner. I've seen where short service lengths, where your buildings or houses are very close to the sewer main, those odors can actually migrate up into the house, and that's usually pretty concerning. That epoxy has definitely a prevalent smell, kind of like model airplane glue. Not pleasant, can give you headaches if you're exposed to it for any kind of length of time. So this is kind of one of those things we usually specify notifications a couple days prior to doing this. Let people know what's going on. Usually recommend that they're not in the house during that time. I have seen, hasn't happened, but I've seen in the news where the fire department gets called, the downtowns gets closed because people smell. They're worried it's some sort of gas leak or something else kind of leak. So something to definitely keep in mind when you're doing these projects and specifications is that you definitely want to take those orders into account and make sure that your notifications and things are set up and maybe even some advertisements in the paper so people know what they're doing. So now we'll get into the actual installation procedures. So really it starts with the owner of the utility, you guys for the most part, or whoever that may be, the initial evaluation. And so we've kind of talked about what the existing conditions are. So this kind of goes in with your process of cleaning and inspection of your pipes, whether that's a yearly by annual thing on what kind of schedule you'll build for that. But what you want to be doing is you're going through these pipes and you're looking at you're starting to see cracks in some of certain sections or roots, lots of roots. I've also seen where you can get minerals coming in through your joints that build up pretty hard, almost like a concrete or cementous material. So these are all kind of things you're looking for or looking at on a yearly or monthly basis, and you're identifying those lines as, hey, we should probably look at this as lining those. once you actually get into that process and you say, yep, we're going to line this pipe, you're kind of documenting, pipe size, length, existing material, the depth, number of services, and then any repair issues you want to. And so this is kind of right prior to the bidding process. So then with that existing issues, any spot repairs, kind of like we talked about with the grade, or if there's open holes or collapses, you'll want to get in there and repair those prior to bidding out or at kind of that same time frame to bidding out a CIPP lining. You can include those in the bid, but my experience, you're kind of setting yourself up for some risk. The lining contractors usually don't like to sub out; they just like to get in line and be done. So it's an easier process. And then also if you have areas that you can't see because of damage or holes during that project, if those get repaired and then you go down and you see 6 more repairs that need to be done, or the pipes collapsed and you're not going to be able to do the lining, you're kind of risking finding out as you're doing the project what's going on, instead of kind of getting ahead of it and knowing. So there's some risk with doing those spot repairs with the project, and I usually recommend that those are completed beforehand, so you kind of know what you're getting into, and more importantly, the CIPP liners, you contractors know what they're going to do. As far as the bidding, kind of the initial evaluation, if you can bid areas and sizes that are in the same, or areas that are in the same, lines that are in the same area, sizes helps kind of grouping those together, not a big deal. Those are just kind of things to think about, going into the bidding process. Usually when you bid, you kind of have the specs, and then you have a map of where everything's at. They're pretty simple compared to like an open cut trench where you've got all the profiles and things like that. So there's a little bit simpler bidding process as far as the plans showing that. We'll go into so we've got the project bid, awarded a contractor. So kind of the initial process is they'll come in, they'll do the cleaning and inspection again, essentially where this project started with the evaluation. They'll actually come in, clean out the pipe. They'll look at, verify lengths. They'll document where the services are for when they actually do the lining. They'll make sure no other issues have come up. This could potentially be 6 months or longer or shorter when you did your initial evaluation, so that we're just kind of making sure there's no other collapses or things that might have come up between your cleaning and their cleaning. During this process, I usually recommend doing the service dye testing. So here you get kind of a dye pod, and you put it in usually a toilet or some sort of facility in the building or resident, and you're going through and basically verifying that each service is active. And where this is kind of an advantage is you can eliminate abandoned or capped services during this lining process. You don't have to reopen them. So you can potentially cut down on I&I and roots and things like that. You don't have to worry about that cap breaking or opening up later down the road. So kind of one of the big or another big advantage of this is you can go through and eliminate services that aren't active or could potentially be an I&I risk down the road. So they've got all, so now we're down, we've got everything documented. Contractors doing the wet out process. This normally takes place back in a factory or shop. There is the ability to do the wet out process out in the field. It usually depends on larger pipe and lengths. So some contractors have that ability. So this is a felt liner, and you can kind of see the picture up to the right. It's a felt liner that's impregnated with epoxy resin, and so the amount of resin kind of depends on what you specify in the bid documents and the depth of the pipe. I normally recommend fully deteriorated, or to specify a fully deteriorated pipe, regardless of the condition of the existing pipe. So this essentially gives you a pipe that is self-sufficient structurally once you're done with the curing process. So if that existing pipe, collapses, breaks, comes apart after the fact, you don't really have to worry about that. That existing pipe kind of goes away as far as carrying your flows after this install process. So I usually recommend the fully deteriorated liner calculations. So now we'll get into so after they get the liner built together, they're put together, impregnated, they'll bring it out to the site, kind of talked about. Usually comes out in a refrigerated truck, or at least, if it's in the winter, keeping it from exposed to the elements. The direct sunlight thing with the premature curing, something you just want to watch and make sure that they're being careful with those liners, because like I said, they can heat up and cook prematurely, and then you're left with a liner that you can't use, and it's usually on the contractor. But if you get that halfway down the line and it starts to cook on the top and they can't get any farther, then it becomes your problem, because you're starting to back up services. So something just to keep an eye on. Okay, so we'll get into the actual installation process. You kind of see this truck off to the right here on this picture. They've got their rig where they're pulling in the new liner, and the manhole's kind of right where at their feet. They invert the pipe as it comes into that rig and then pushes into the existing pipe through the manhole access usually. And then usually it's pushed through with compressed air. They can use water as well, but it's inserted and pushed all the way down through the pipe until it gets out to the other side, whether that's a manhole or the other access point. So then it essentially is a narrow balloon that blows up down through the pipe and just kind of works its way down the pipe. So once that's in completely all the way through the pipe, that you can see it on the other end, then they'll do their cure, which is usually hot water or steam. I see UV is starting to become a technology that's entering the field, so that could be a possibility too. And then the cure time, it basically depends on the method, that whether it's the hot water or steam, depends on the size of the pipe and the thickness, how much epoxy is in there. So that process is for smaller liners, the 8-inch range, you're looking at 3 to 4 hours typically. Larger pipe, when you're talking 42, you could be the whole day or longer. So that kind of has to factor into your bypass pumping equation and the services is the residential ones usually go quick enough that you don't have to worry about backing up. But if you have services on some of these big pipes, that may be something you have to do the bypass pumping too. Once the cure time is finished, so they've reached their temperature and their time, they'll go to both ends, cut the pipe, send down, with the smaller ones, they'll send down their little robot that cuts out the services, and they've identified those prior to the actual lining process. Normally this kind of show up as a darker, lighter shadow in the pipe, but just in case, they have documented the footage on, from manhole A, it's 16 feet to the first manhole or first service, and the direction of where that is in the pipe. So those are cut out, and like I said, that's nice. As you cut those out, all that flow goes right into the pipe and down to the manhole, and you've essentially captured all the flow from that service, and not lost it in a trench or something like that. And then post-construction, so as the contractor finishes the services, I usually require a video, basically a completion video. They'll go down, verify that there's no issues with the install and that all the services are established. And then I usually have that provided as a video, a DVD. So you have that video of that completed install. And then kind of going along with that, I also usually have a spec about any missed services. It's pretty rare. Like I said, it's usually pretty well documented of where the service is at, but just in case a service is missed, there's usually an item in there that the contractor needs to go out within 24 hours of being notified and cut that service out. So it's always good to have, so you're not kind of holding your don't have any way to cut that service out that you kind of got. They're aware that if they miss something, they need to come back. So another good thing to kind of specify. So here's kind of a graphic of the installation procedure, kind of starting up at number 1 in the top right. You see your pipe cleaned and ready to go. There's some cracks and the pipe's probably at the end of its useful life. Number 2 down in the bottom left there, the pipe, or kind of the liner balloon is working its way through the pipe and adhering right to the sides of that pipe. And then number 3, you've cut the end off and you've essentially got a brand new pipe in the inside of your existing pipe. So just to follow up, kind of the owner follow up with the installation procedures, you want to do a review of that video that I kind of talked about that the contractor turns in. You want to go through, I mean, they've said, yep, our process or the install looks good. Always good to verify on your own. Go through, you want to look for any fins or sags, kind of like we talked about with the liner deflects. Fins on the top of the pipe may be acceptable. Fins on the bottom are usually a no-go because you're looking at building up materials and things like that. You want to look and make sure that the epoxy is fully impregnated in the liner. Part of the spec is usually that the epoxy resin has a color. So you've got that nice white liner, and then you use it's usually a light blue color for the epoxy. So any of those dry spots show up pretty well as a big white dot. So you want to make sure that those are, that there's no dry spots or areas of concern there. Just make sure that all the services are reopened. You'll usually find those out pretty quick as people use their facilities and whatnot. So that's a good verification just to make sure that all those got reopened. The other thing is kind of getting into additional considerations, and this may happen way back at the evaluation period, but things to look at after the lining or prior to the lining is possibly doing the manholes, lining the manholes and the services. So I know in the past I've seen where we've lined the service mains or the interceptors because they were experiencing H2S damage. That hydrogen gas was actually eating the materials of the pipe. So once those liners were done, then that actually A2S damage ended up being focused back to the manholes. So those manholes that seemed to be in pretty good shape at the time, they started deteriorating very rapidly because that H2S didn't have any food, or essentially food from that pipe. So those are things maybe to look at is if we install the service line or line these service mains or interceptors, should we do the manhole as well? You can kind of see that picture, the graphic. There's, besides the service main, there is actually a lot more components to the sewer system. The other thing is I&I. Manholes are a pretty good item that can see I&I. So if you're focused on reducing I&I in your system, the liner and the service main is great, but you may also want to look at the manholes. And then I'll talk about the services here after this slide, but I think I've got one more poll question. You might have already seen it, but have you lined manholes or services in your system before? Just curious if people have experienced or have done that.
So Mike, answers are coming in here. We'll just give it a few more seconds here. All right, so it looks like about 71% are answering no, have not lined manholes or service lines, and 29% are saying yes.
Okay, so yeah, that's I think that a lot of people have lined their mains, and then the manholes and service lines are kind of an additional cost or consideration that may or may not get done. So I think that's probably typical. So thanks for everybody's input on that. So we talked about manholes, and kind of the last thing to look at or evaluate is service lines. A lot of times, from what I've seen, the infiltration and inflow from service lines is probably more prevalent than in the mains or manholes. Sometimes this is your biggest I&I contributor. There are and roots from that picture. You know, I've seen a lot of times 6 months down the road, you do your follow-up video on these lines or cleanings, your nice blue liner, and then you've got a roots already starting to come out of a service, and kind of feels like you haven't accomplished a whole lot. So there's a couple different types of service liners. And this is, trenchless liners. You could go through and replace your service after the fact, but there are some trenchless options. There's what's called a top hat liner, and this actually gets inserted from the main and going up into the service towards the building or resident. It's kind of shaped like a top hat. You've got the rim around your existing pipe in the main, and then it actually expands up towards the service entrance, I guess would be the way to say that. They're usually short distances, a couple feet, maybe up to 10 feet maximum. So you're not maybe eliminating the whole. If you've got 100 and 200 foot service, you're only doing a small portion of it. This is more to get the connection to the main, which is a huge issue usually when you see it, that usually those have broken free, or there's a lot of I&I from those. So that it is an advantage or something to look at. Kind of similar to the top hat, there's a full wrap liner, and instead of just the rim of the service in the main, this actually goes the whole circumference or diameter of the main, and then goes kind of the same distance, a couple feet up the service, and more just to kind of secure that service connection to the main. Kind of the last option is a full length liner. So here's, you would actually install, similar to what you just did in the main, is a line, a new CIPP liner from the beginning of the service down to the main, and usually these are done through a clean out, or possibly you'd have to do a dig out at the service location. But the advantage of this is you've lined the whole line, and so you're cutting down on the roots and I&I. Kind of the disadvantage or limitation to this is usually in municipalities, the sewer service is the owner's responsibility. So for a municipality or an owner to invest heavily into these service liners, you kind of have to weigh the cost versus the benefits there. And there may be some cost sharing to do between the homeowner or business and the city, and so there's things like that could be done. But obviously there's some discussions or decisions that would be made with those service liners, because they are an added cost, and whether or not they're a benefit versus that cost is something that would have to be discussed. So I think that was all I had as far as what I wanted to cover. So if we have some questions, we can answer those.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Great presentation. Yeah, we've got a few questions that have come in. So I guess starting with the first question, is there a minimum temperature, and I think they mean outside temperature, that CIPP can be completed? I think in your picture where you showed the truck and it being loaded, there was some snow in the background. So is there a minimum temperature that folks have to be concerned about?
I think it's more so with the weather conditions and equipment. They can steam and use the hot water. So as long as their equipment can overcome the temperatures, like I said, we normally do this during the winter months. The one thing I kind of mentioned was the water trucks freezing up. So the limitations is more in the equipment than the actual liner. So that the liner can be placed at any temperature. Normally these sewers are down 6 feet or more. So you're not, those liners aren't freezing down there, but the biggest thing is having the availability of water to actually do the curing, and the ability of the equipment, to heat up the pipe enough to cure it. So yeah, I guess hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, and then another question came in is, do you specify end seals on the main liner? Anything that we need to do to the end of the?
Yeah, normally I'd call out kind of a grouting on the end just so you have a nice seal in that manhole. I assume that's kind of what the question is. So after those ends are cut off, then yeah, I would put some sort of grout or water seal on those ends in the manhole just to get a nice clean connection and make sure you're not getting I&I from outside that that existing liner. So yeah, that's probably another good thing to specify is just kind of cleaning up those ends as they come into the manholes or the access points.
Okay. Another question, what's the ideal length of a main to do, or is there an ideal length?
I don't think there's an ideal length. Obviously, most sewer systems or manholes are roughly 400 to 500 feet apart, which is, I think, a great distance as far as lining. The CIPP lining can go a lot farther. I've heard over 1,000 feet. Kind of the limitations there are your ability to clean that pipe. And the farther you're pushing that pipe, the more pressure you're kind of building up to get it down the pipe. So I would kind of, I guess, ideal length is under 1,000 feet. And then once you start getting above that, that might be where you're starting to get some input from the contractor, or you're putting in additional access points or manholes prior to the actual lining project. So that I think that's kind of part of that evaluation process is, and if you don't have access already, maybe it's a good time to put access in too. So there's that, how far can your equipment clean the pipe, after the fact, after you get this lined, are you even available to go down and video and clean that pipe down the road? So that's something maybe to evaluate. Like I said, under 1,000 is usually pretty easily done and acceptable. So.
Okay, so maybe a question on, you've answered the length question. What's the smallest diameter pipe that you could use CIPP for?
Well, I believe the service lines go down to 4. So, a normal sewer main is kind of in that 6 to 8 inch range. The 6 inch, you can't really install 6 inch anymore. So that may be kind of that evaluation is that a pipe to upsize. But the services go down to 4 inches. I don't know if they go I'm sure you could probably go down farther than that. But service mains, I just because of flows and requirements, like the current DEQ, I probably wouldn't line anything smaller than 8. I would look at anything smaller than that. If they were service mains, I would look at upsizing those to meet current regulations.
Okay. What is the approximate lifespan of the liner material?
So through the specifications and I'm trying to think if it falls under AWA or AASHTO AASHTO. It's guaranteed for 50 years. So at a minimum, 50 years. I do think that just from experience that pipe's going to last. It'll be closer to a PVC lifespan. But yeah, a minimum of 50 years is the lifespan. That's essentially dictated by the specification and standards.
Okay, thanks. Maybe the final question that I've got is, is DEQ approval required for a CIPP lining project?
So the short answer is yes. You are affecting the flow rate. Essentially, you are putting a lining. You're changing the circumference of the pipe, and so you at least need to do that evaluation prior to the lining and look and make sure that you're not limiting the flow. I normally, because of the friction factor and all that fun stuff, you're actually improving the flow even by putting in that that thickness of liner. But that evaluation needs to be done. You don't want to go in and line and then create issues. So and then yes, so the DEQ would want to review that and make sure that those calculations were done to make sure that you weren't limiting flow. So or limiting flow. So you would turn in a standard, sewer checklist and an engineering report, and for the most part, what you're turning in is that you've calculated and made sure that you're not changing the flow or limiting your flow to what that pipe size is able to do based on what your system experiences. So yes requires DEQ approval.
Okay.
Similar to a normal open cut replacement.
Great. Question, if you remove a manhole from a CIPP, can you clamp new seals onto the liner pipe? I think what that's asking is if you had a manhole, but you take the manhole out, what do you do with that gap that you now have?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would think they would make a Fernco that would attach to that diameter of the pipe. It is structurally essentially its own pipe, so as long as you could get something that could clamp down on it or the right circumference, then you could put in a repair section similar to what you would do with anything else. If you had to repair, say a 10-foot section of existing pipe, you would do the same procedure there, where you'd put in a new PVC pipe, similar diameter. You don't want to go whatever kind of matches, make sure your flow lines match, and then a Fernco that would meet the circumference of that lining. That should be doable.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike, on that great presentation. And we've reached kind of the end of our time together. So as we close out here, Mike has got a couple of articles out on our website on trenchless replacements if you are looking for more information. Those are out there posted at m-m.net. Just a reminder, we'll post today's PowerPoint slides and a recording of today's presentation on our website. One clarification related to the PDH credits. I just got word kind of through the presentation that we are actually changing those to a different person. So the contact is Lori Holton, and her email address is lhultin@m-m.net. And you can send a request to her for those. Make sure to join us on Wednesday, January 27th for our next webinar on retrofitting a 1960s water treatment plant in Glasgow, Montana. You can register for that through our website as well, m-m.net. And finally, we would love to hear from you. Please stay in touch with us on our social media through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you can join us next time, and have a great day.